So I take my thimble. My thimble always goes on the middle finger right here. So basically when I have my needle, this part is hitting on here when I push. So I push the needle like that. So I'm going to start 1 centimeter in right here, poke, and then I push here and pick it up with the same hand. Then I pull. Very important when I pull that I don't pull too hard. I have to let it be quite easy. So I usually continue around 2-3 centimeters further. I pull, and see, I don't pull too extremely hard. I kind of let it sit very easily, very organically. If I pull too much, it's going to pull the fabric and it starts to pucker. So I would not want that. So then I continue. As of course, I'm going quite slowly, but once you get the hang of it, you go a lot faster. Whoops. As well. To make sure it's laying down flat nicely. You can also do bigger stitches if you want, or smaller ones, but this is the size I personally like a lot. Then when I finish, I come to the end. See, that's what happens when you pull too much, and I just did. So I'm going to let it just get a bit more loosen. So at the end, upsala, pull it out. I just do a double stitch here. One, two. And that is my basting stitch. So once again, I need some more basting thread. I love this one from COUTURE. It's the best one. So the next stitch is kind of an invisible one. It's called a blind hem stitch. So that's the one that will connect the lining to the wool. So it'll connect them both, but just with a little dot showing. So usually I do is I knot my thread. I knot my thread at the end. Then I start from inside. I give it a little bit of a stitch in here just to hide the knot. Make sure I'm only catching a few hairs here. Only a few hairs, so I'm not going through the entire fabric. So that's hidden. Then from that spot, I come up. I do not come up further to the left or to the right. I come up on the same spot. And then I pull. So the next stitch is from that same spot. I put my needle through. And in the middle of the weave of the fabric, I come up to the next spot, including the lining, like that. And I pull through. And that connects both with one little dot right here. Do you see that? And then I continue. And the best is to always keep a consistent spacing between both. That is always consistent. It looks the best in the end. And make sure you don't pull the fabric too hard. Make sure the fabric isn't curved around your finger too much so that it remains a straight line. I would also always recommend to have your lining basted to your wool or to your fabric like I have here. Basted beforehand so it holds all the fabric in place. But as you see, it's very, very connected right here. And usually this holds. This is great to attach lining to your trousers on the inside, to the curtain, and for many other types of linings, especially like the lining inside of your bespoke jacket, for example. All those types of linings. This I find is amazing. However, on the lining of your jacket, you can also use a regular prick stitch, which is not like a blind hem. It's a stitch which is basically like a few mil from the edge, and you go up and down making dots on the lining but not connecting the lining from the hem. So that is also a bit different. But for this one, you just continue like this. This is what it should look like in the end. a consistent stitching. Okay, so the next stitch is called a prick stitch. That is the stitch where you just see little dots on the fabric, and is to connect both the lining and the fabric. It's a bit more of a decorative stitch, but it connects both layers together. So you start by making a knot, as I have here, at the end of your thread. Then what I do is I like to poke somewhere else and then come into the place where I actually want to be sewing. Later on I will cut that part off. So right in that spot where you came out here, you poke your needle right behind it. You poke under and you come out. Now you have to think what your distance is. I like to do it around 4 mil apart is what I like, but of course it depends. So that is the first prick stitch. Next, I will do the exact same thing again, where I just go under and come out. When you have a guideline, like let's say lining, and it is already ironed and pressed well, and then you already have a guideline of where you can prick stitch. But right now I'm just doing it open, so it can be a bit wonky, but I hope it still looks good in the end. So as you see, you have these beautiful dots right here, and they're secure. It's very, very beautiful. We do that a lot in tailoring, especially if you would like to prick stitch at the end of your lining, like inside a jacket, to attach them both together. But it's also very important that when you do the stitch on your lining, that you do it very close to the edge of the hem of the lining. By hem, I don't mean the bottom of the jacket, I mean inside. Very, very close, so usually about 1-2 mil away from where the lining ends. Okay, so as you see, this is my stitch. So at the end, I poke in, and what I like to do is I like to poke out in a different place. And sometimes I like to poke it out under that lining where you would never see it, and I do a very small knot to secure it. And then I come back out, and then I can cut it off. And now that is my prick stitch. So the next stitch I'm going to do is a cross stitch. So you make a knot in your thread. Then I like to place the knot in a different place than where I'm going to sew. And in this stitch, if you're left-handed, you work from right to left. And if you're right-handed, you work from left to right. So it's kind of like you work backwards than usual. So I have already come out at this point. So what I do is from the point where I came out, I imagine a diagonal line of basically, I think about the width of my cross stitch. And then I just poke in and I poke out exactly underneath where I came out on this stitch here. Next, I have to think about, so if this is the end of my first cross, this will roughly be the beginning of my second one, and that's where I actually have to poke in. And I poke out right above this dot right here, and because that is where I will be making my next cross, like that. Then I poke back in underneath this one, and I poke out right where that thread comes out. Like that. So that's how it starts, and sometimes it needs a bit of practice. I also don't have lines to abide by, so sometimes it can get a bit off. But if I start doing this for a little bit, then I will start making very, very perfect squares or crosses. And it also depends on what fabric you use for this. So you can also choose what size you do them. This is relatively normal. You can do them really small, or you can do them also much, much bigger. So now to finish off the stitch, what I like to do is either I stitch it up right here, I just double knot it, or I go directly from this point under the fabric and I come out at a point that's a bit not visible on the garment, and I double knot here. So it depends on where you're sewing your cross stitch.